So let's call the meeting to order. It's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Regional Agreement Committee meeting of January 30th. We will start with, as we always do, the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. This meeting is being recorded for later use and posting on WHCA, so hopefully everyone will behave. We'll see. Any public comment? I don't see anyone here, so I don't think we have any public comment, but I'll ask for public comment. And for those watching, we encourage that. If you have anything to say, come on down. So seeing no public comment, we will move to the meeting minutes approval. So in your Google Drive, you do have a copy of the meeting minutes from January 9th. So I'd be looking for a motion to approve the meeting minutes of January 9th, 2023, please.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor? Chris, good? Yes. Okay. So 4-0. Jen, you got those?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to jump right back into where we left off. So what I tried to do, I'll pass these around, is get ourselves, what I was trying to avoid is I feel like with our meetings, we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, and then we're not going to come back for a week. And what I was trying to do is create a living document that we can kind of keep what's open, what we talked about, and what's there. Just one. If you need another copy, just pass it down.
Oh,
I get it.
Or sorry, it's two-sided. Two-sided. Yours,
this is not two-sided.
Rich, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, mine's two-sided.
Here you go. You want another one?
I think we need two more.
Sorry. But make sure everyone has one. You got plenty here. You got a stack. There you are. Everyone has one now? Yes. Sounds good. George, you got one? Yep. All right. So basically so this is kind of a living document, at least that's the thing. So we'll just keep it in the drive. I'm going to try and take notes. I'm looking for all of you to keep me honest if I missed something or I didn't get something right. But I figure if we have everything in one document, it's just going to be a lot easier than, oh yeah, we talked about that, and then we don't talk about it for 6 weeks, and then if you're like me, it's going to be, what the heck did we talk about 6 weeks ago? So just kind of have it here. So right now we kind of have this open listing. We haven't taken any formal votes, but we talked about a 2/3 vote for all school committee votes. We talked about the language requiring the agreement to be reviewed every X years. I think someone said 3, but I don't think we actually got to whether it was 3 or 5. So I just left it as X every so many years. We talked about assessing the towns using the mileage method. We had discussion last week about capital costs and emergency repairs. And what we talked about, again, help me if I got anything wrong here, but we talked about breaking that into a capital section and a separate emergency repair section. And then our homework was to think about the best way to proceed for those emergency repairs. We talked about emergency repairs potentially being defined as something that impacts student and or staff safety in day-to-day operations. I think we were talking about what maybe would or wouldn't be covered in terms of repairs, or we talked about maybe having a matrix for E&D. And then we kind of left that conversation with whether or not we even needed an emergency repair section. So again, I'm just trying to codify kind of what we talked about up to this point. We're not looking to make any decisions. We talked about maybe coming up with amounts. So that's kind of what we've covered so far. We also left kind of open items that we kind of set aside for transportation. So we talked about transportation, I think it was in our first meeting. We kind of talked about the superintendent proposing that. That will be proposed. I think Jeff's not here to confirm this, but I think that's not going to be on the agenda for this school committee meeting, but on the 15th. So on February 15th, as part of the school committee, there will be a presentation on transportation. That's the plan. So sharing that with this committee, because if you can attend that, or at least that section, or at least listen to that, that will kind of give you all a sense of where things are at. And then capital we talked about already. I have that up top. And then we had some other takeaways. So I'm going to come back to the takeaways in a second, but one of them was John was going to provide us the 7,000 items. I think, did you put those in the drive? Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. Timing of payments, right on time. So we talked about kind of everyone better understanding, you know, my pass that. So we're just kind of recapping where we're at, Frank. So this document is intended to be a living document to keep that. So halfway down, we're talking about timing of payments as an open item, just understanding that issue. And then in terms of the reviews of the agreement, the takeaway there was some potential draft language, which I kind of took a shot at. It's a little funky. We can get back to that in a second. And then the items we haven't talked about that we still need to talk about on the back page there are leases, statutory method, and utilization of funds. So as we go, I'm going to try and just keep this updated so we have it. And again, once we start, the goal here, I guess this is what I was thinking and I wanted to share because I think some of us have started to have conversations with various boards. What I was hoping we'd do is spend this meeting and hopefully maybe by the next meeting kind of come up with a document that we feel is representative of what we're thinking, and then that takeaway document then can go to the finance committees, the boards of selectmen, and the school committee. So that way we've all kind of talked about the same thing and then we're clear, because some of these are very complex items, and so I would just hate to be in a position where I'm sitting in a school committee meeting, or Chris is sitting in a school committee and we're saying, well, we think this is what we talked about and what we need to do, and then you do something different, you do something different, the next thing we come back, it just would be very inefficient. So using this as a living document to come up with something, hopefully in the next week or two, that we actually have, we all feel good about, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna take this to the school committee, this is what we're gonna talk about. Here are some options, here's the issue, here's what we want you to weigh in on, and then we bring it back and go from there. So that was just a little bit of time spent trying to get things and keep things organized. So does that sound okay? What I really want to make sure I'm doing is capturing the intent of this group. So if you see anything that's like, I don't think we said that, or we can go back to that, I don't want to get caught in the semantics. I just think we need to have something that lives that we can go with. Okay, so far so good. So in terms of where we go from here, what I was saying is we can kind of go back to our follow-up items. So forgive me, John Stanbrook, but I haven't gone in there. You said it's in the drive. Let me get back there.
I can find it.
No, I know. I was just jumping from, like I said, it was one of those days where I was jumping from meetings to meetings. So let me just try and pull that up. Does everyone else have, some of you have access to electronics? Yes.
What is that you're looking for, Chris?
So I'm just going to go into the regional agreement drive on the Google Drive, because what John put in there was kind of a listing of the 7,000 items. So one of the takeaways we had from last meeting was to understand what we're classifying as potential items for capital, and there should be a definition there. So while I'm trying to pull mine up, John, do you want to kind of just share? You have it in front of you?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Perfect. So can you kind of give an overview? You don't have to read it verbatim.
That's okay. So the 7,000s are related to acquisition, improvement, and replacement of fixed assets. These are just the coding system that DESI uses statewide in all schools. The coding system for 7,100 is purchase of land and buildings, and that's if you actually purchase anything, a building site or improve it. It's the site work. It's broken down. 7,200 is purchase of land and buildings, but it's the building, the actual building and what's inside. 7,300 is equipment, and this is for new equipment. 7,350 is capital technology, anything to do with any technology purchases in excess of $5,000. Any leases that would go over $5,000. 7,400 is equipment, and that's for replacement of equipment. So 7,300 is new equipment, 7,400 is replacement of equipment. 7,500 is motor vehicles, if you trade in a new vehicle, and 7,600 is if you replace a vehicle with another vehicle. So it's pretty much what, if you know about accounting, it's the fixed asset stuff.
Okay. So, so we have that kind of all look at. So this is when we made reference to the 2018 agreement, and there's specific language that said, for capital items, look at the 7,000 of DESI. So we wanted everyone to kind of understand what the 7,000 items are, so that's part of it. We can come back to capital in a second. Jeff is going to talk a little bit about the emergency repair section, because I know he pulled some stuff, I think it's in his packet, so we'll hold off on maybe the capital emergency if he gets here, because I think he'll help us with that. Did anyone have a chance to talk to their respective folks around the timing of payments? So Frank, I know you brought this one up, but I don't know if other folks had. So we kind of had the conversation last time of aligning those dates based upon the...
There's another document in there about that.
There is, okay. What is that document?
The same. Again, I just made something up. It's
Payment schedules, is that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the drive, there is an assessment schedule document that shows the potential agreement schedule and then the tax payment
Do you
schedule.
want me to just explain it real quickly?
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay. So the agreement schedule is what is in the agreement. When payments, that's the top left, payment 1, payment 2, payment 3, payment 4, quarterly payments. Tax payment schedule is when the towns get when their tax payments are due. And the current debt schedule is just the 5 things that we have on that are debt related and when they're due. So again, Whitman, their feasibility study band principal and interest is due on June 15th. Hanson's HVAC, number 1 and 2, are due on June 15th and July 15th. The high school interest payment is due July 1, and the high school principal and interest is due on January 1. So that was, I tried to lay it out so it'd be easy to follow.
Got it. So do we know, because I think, Frank, and maybe you can help us with this because you weren't here at the last meeting, and we were trying to get a better sense of, so what is the issue the August, November, February, May for the normal assessments, or is it in addition to?
When we issue tax bills, we have to give a 30-day window for payments. The bills go out July 1st, they're due August 1st. And we don't need till August, but it would be helpful to have perhaps a week or two to let the early payers come in and make tax payments so that we have the funds available to make those payments. So if the payment were due mid-month rather than the first of the month, it would take a significant amount of pressure off the towns, because clearly that's the biggest quarterly payment we're going to make every quarter.
So something like August 15th, November 15th, February 15th, and May 15th?
I'd like to go to the 30th, but I don't want to get greedy.
Do you know what impact that would have on a district finance standpoint?
For cash flow purposes, I haven't modeled it out at all, I don't know.
Okay.
I know that in general, first and second quarter were somewhat tight. Third and fourth quarter, we have plenty of cash.
And so from a tight standpoint, can you just educate us on like what that would mean? Like how would that, and we can give you time to take it away and kind of do some more of this next meeting, but. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just totally speculating right now but we, first and second quarter, we have a lot of bills, and we're only getting the quarters, in. We have, just like a town does, we have large one-time payments right up front to the Plymouth County Retirement and to Mass GIC. So those are millions of dollars that go out the window, go out the door in the first quarter.
Got it.
So
You could start to kind of think about what some of that would
Yes.
look like. Okay.
Chris?
Yeah.
At least at a minimum, I think that April 1st moving into May 1st would be a huge help for,
Yeah.
because it compounds the issue of only getting the money in just barely to being only the early payers have the money in right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that was, so if we look at the 2018 agreement, you don't have to pull it out, but
Yeah.
basically that was addressed, right? It was August, November, February, and May, so that was addressed. But if we're still seeing some issues, it's while we're here and while we're doing this, right, I think it's at least worth trying to understand what does that look like theoretically if it goes the 15th.
And a substantial amount of people, if things are still the way they used to be, pay right on the day. So, you know, it's due May 1st,
Right.
and they're paying May 1st. The towns also have a bill due May 1st. They're not getting the cash flow to be able to turn it around to pay it to us. Does that make sense?
Our experience has been that we do get significant early payments when we bill quarterly. I mean, you go back to when we did semi-annually, we were borrowing money all the time. But we went quarterly about 22 years ago and vastly changed how people pay. And I typically find that probably 25 to 30% of the bills come in that first week after they go out, which I'm always pleased and amazed by. I always schedule mine to go in on the first, but although actually I've been paying early lately. But John makes a good point that we have a number of bills, like the schools, that we have to look at on July 1st. We have all our insurance. Fortunately, our general insurance carrier allows us a month to make that first payment, but the health group, for example, is looking for that money on July 1st. And I would guess I don't have any experience with the GIC, but I'm assuming they're also looking for it right on the number. And those sometimes represent significant payments. The county retirement, unless they've changed, requires an upfront payment, but I don't believe they beat us on the head for the first. I think there's a period of time to make that payment. So, depending on the resources in the towns and the schools, we're kind of in crunch time when we make those first series of payments.
The county retirement came after us this year because it was later than they wanted, the July 15th, I think.
Yeah, they want it by mid-month, yeah.
From your vantage point, and I definitely want to try and get some perspective from Hanson if we can too, but 25%, 4 quarterly payments make sense, or is that something we should think about as well? Is there a flow to?
I'm sorry?
So right now we do 4 equal 25%
Right.
payments. So something that I think someone threw out last time was, well, should it be 25, 25, 25, 25, or should it be 30? Like, would that make it worse from your perspective, or do you think there is a rhythm to some of those payments where we should be thinking about those percentages as well?
If I may, Chris,
Yeah.
if you want me to explain that idea of the 30, 30, 30, 10. And Frank,
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm
that's okay.
looking at it. And you said the 30th, if you could get it of every month would be better instead of the 1st. So like August 1st, August 30th would be better. Is that what I heard?
Well, ideally, the longer we have to pay.
Okay, so just
Simpler
listening to
is
Frank,
the
and that, I like your shirt, by the way, that is a nice shirt. I don't know if anyone else noticed. Frank and I called each other up before we got here. But seriously, if it was a compromise where August 15th and November 15th, you know, and all on the 15th, if it works in the district, and my idea was last week that it seems like it's harder for the towns to make that last payment of the 25%, where John just said the school has more money. If the towns could come up with just 5% more on the 15th on those first 3 payments, that would make 90% of the payment paid, where then the towns, which may not have so much money at the end, only pay 10%, and the schools got most of their money that they already need. But if there was a compromise where the towns maybe got another 2 weeks, to not only make that additional 5%, but just so that they could have their bills in order. I mean, that was my thinking, and then I just wanted to add to what Frank would say, so that if the towns could actually get another 2 weeks, that could work out.
Yeah, I mean, so much of, I think, what we're trying to do is figure out, like, what makes sense, right? Because I'm not sure when this was put together back in '92, if it was just like a, hey, here's when the taxes are due, let's divide it by a quarter, and let's just do it, right? And that was also 30 years ago, and what was happening. So I think it's, to Jim's point, like, we can do whatever we want, what makes sense. So if it's the way to change this that works for both parties,
Right.
let's change it.
Well, it would have to work for all three. It would have to work for
Right.
Whitman and
When I say
Hanson
both
and
parties,
District.
right, all three
Yeah.
parties, yes.
It's interesting, when we put this agreement together, we were only billing semi-annually. So we didn't see payment one until November 1st.
Oh,
So, you know, there were a lot of grants issued back then,
Things have changed.
revenue anticipation notes. And I remember that was a fairly routine thing to go to the selectmen and ask for permission to borrow until tax payments started coming in. When we went, I don't know, Hanson does quarterly as well, right? Yeah, when we went to quarterly, it made a big difference in cash flow.
and obviously, this would be something that we would have to, get approval from both finance committees, that, if we could do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's understanding, right? So I think if the towns say, here's the flow of our revenue, here's when we get it, here's when we get the majority of it, here's what it looks like, here's what we're spending, and kind of have that understanding, and then John and the folks here are able to say, and here's when we need it, then we can kind of match that up and probably find some commonalities of, well, we don't need it here, we don't have it here, okay, great, let's shift it, all right? Like, if we don't need it, you don't have it, why are we creating the stress?
Right.
Right, to your point, maybe if we shift it around. So I think, again, that's the whole point of ripping through this. I think we should all feel good about an understanding. It wasn't like, well, it's simple to just say 4 quarterly payments. We'll just do 4 quarterly payments. Meanwhile, we have no idea why we're doing it that way. It doesn't make sense. Is it crushing the towns? Is it hurt? We don't know. So exactly, I think that's the spirit of this conversation. So maybe, I don't know where that lives or who's willing to take that.
I'd like to have another conversation with
That'd
our
be great.
treasurer collector and accountant.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe
Be sure, when I'm.
I think just understand
Still the case.
Right, right. I think understanding that, and then John, maybe you can kind of look at, here's the flow, because I doubt it's a linear, right? Like our expenses are exactly the same all 4 quarters, like that. That I guess it could be, but that.
You know, I think the difference for the schools is when the state money comes in, because that's a big payment.
That as well, we should factor that in, right? So it's almost like a high-level cash flow analysis of what's coming in, what's going out, and when you feel the pain. Same for you folks. Sorry. Okay.
And, maybe the 15th doesn't work for the district, where maybe it works for the towns. Or maybe it's the 3rd week of that particular month that works out for you guys, which would even be better for the towns.
Like if we went to maybe the 20th instead of the 30th, because then that would give the almost first full 3 weeks, and then give 10 days to the 30th. If we're still waiting for people to come in, that gives them at least 3 weeks for money to come in instead of just 2 weeks. So like the 20th could also be considered as well.
I think it should all be considered. Again, I
Yeah.
think we just got to look at the scenarios of like, what is the implication, right? So if it's, we need to borrow from ourselves a little bit, sure. If it's, we need to borrow $2 million or $3 million, right, we're kind of stuck. Like, how do we do that? So, all right, so can we take that one away and maybe we'll just kind of set that one aside until, and I'll kind of change the notes here of, we need to better understand kind of the cash flows of when the town has capital and when they don't, and the schools, and then we're going to compare notes and we can line it up and then have an agreement that hopefully makes some sense. So does that sound good? Okay, awesome. Okay, so the next one was just kind of, again, this is, I wanted to put like a straw person language here so we can react to it, but we may have to change this. So what I was trying to figure out was how would we word something in the agreement in the spirit of what we collectively talked about as a group. There was basically a desire that came from all of us that said, we want to make sure we're looking at this agreement, right? It's been 30 years, like this isn't good. And then we talked about, there was a number of ideas that came from a number of folks. in how to do that. So here's kind of a very, very light first draft for you all to react to, right? So basically we put something that talks about why we're doing this. So you haven't figured it out yet. I'm a big proponent of understanding the why behind why we do things. So when somebody's reading the agreement 30 years from now, why are we doing these reviews? So kind of starting with, given the changes in regulation laws and various boards and committees, it is necessary to review the regional agreement from time to time. Accordingly, the following review process will be completed we talked about September, just because of town meetings and changes and kind of when things happen. In September, every X years, we talked about 3, we talked about 5, don't know, commencing on the whatever that is, 3rd or 5th anniversary once we get this done. And then so that was kind of the why and what, and then the how was the review process will consist of the Hanson Select Board, Whitman Selectmen, and Whitman-Hanson Regional School District, each placing the review of the regional agreement on their respective agendas during the applicable month of September for review. So for example, if we sign the agreement, whatever, we sign the agreement tomorrow, 3 Septembers from now, it would trigger the review. So it would be in that September of 2026. We'd be reviewing, it should be on everyone's agendas. Each board shall vote the review is completed, or if somebody feels there's something that needs to be reviewed, discussed, that a regional agreement should be formed, take a vote, we understand the vote, we all kind of do it at the same time and kind of go from there. So that was high level kind of taking thoughts that people have and trying to put together.
Just a question on, are we leaning toward a 3-year review or a 5-year review? I know Desi recommends 5.
We can hash that out.
3 seems an early process if we're not having problems.
Yeah. So
If I can
Yeah.
jump in on that, absolutely, I agree. So that committee will meet 1, 2, or maybe even 3 times to say, the agreement looks good, let's go for another 3. The original agreement was 5 years.
Right.
And we're sitting here 32 years later with that same agreement, which was the idea of every 3 year. I mean, honestly, Frank, you don't want to be here 3 years from now discussing this.
I don't intend to.
So someone else is going to be sitting in your seat. I'm not going to be here 3 years from now. Someone is going to be sitting in this seat. But there are many members of this committee now that could be sitting here 3 years from now. So those new members are already going to have the experience of the people that are still here. And if there's no problems, it's 2 one-hour meetings. If there is problems, then that's when the group as a whole.
And I think, I guess I'm a little confused right now because I didn't think that, I thought what we talked about last week, and I might be wrong, was that it would just go to like a selectman's agenda item so that the people on that select board could just become familiar with it and you'd say, here it is, what do we think, look at it, if it's okay with everybody, we'll sort of cross it off the agenda item. The school committee would do the same in both towns, FinCom's also, and then it would go for another 3 years. This group didn't come back. This group only came back if a certain board felt there were issues. Correct?
That's what I tried to write.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's what I tried to write.
Right, so it's
pretty
in
much
everyone's
the same thing.
collective, because if we go back, obviously, to those halcyon days of 2018 where we talked about the statutory agreement, there were different pieces that the selectmen had, language of something that they were supposed to look at, the school committee did, but nobody ever got it to their board to review in a timely fashion. So I thought the spirit of this was to say, we'll bring it up at our board, if everybody's comfortable, we'll talk about it there, if they feel there's a problem, then we reconvene a team like this. That's what I thought.
Yeah, and the thinking, right, the thinking would simply be, well, I think we all have calendars, I'm assuming we all, in town and school committee, we have calendars that says like, every September we need to do this, or every 2 years, right? So this would allow us to plug something into those calendars to say, again, use the example that I just created, we magically wave a wand and approve this tomorrow, which we know isn't going to happen. So 3 Septembers from now, actually I guess it would be September of 2025, because we have 23, 24, 25. So September of 2025, exactly like George articulated, it would have to go on everyone's agenda. Now, you might put it on the agenda and everyone gets a copy of the regional agreement, and like, yeah, we read it, we're good. Okay. Now we do. Now that happens again 3 years later, so on and so forth. But it creates a mechanism to force all, to George's point, and I think it was the conversation that we all had last time, to force us to make sure we're actually looking at it. Because even a quick read might be, oh wow, you know, hey, we just, we need, with the, I don't know, the Whitman Middle School address changed. Okay, we need to update the lease, great. Like, it's a simple, it should be a simple thing, but it forces us to do this opposed to just, we put the regional agreement out there and then maybe 20 years later we look at it. Chris?
No, go ahead, Chris.
I was just thinking about the, like, what is the threshold to reconvene? Is it that one board wants it, or?
So that was the language, right? So September of 2025 goes to a school committee agenda, it goes to a Hanson Select Board agenda, it goes to a Whitman Selectman agenda. Any one of them can say, oh, I don't like something here. Great, and we put together, just like we did, we put together a regional agreement, we deal with it.
So it's just the select boards and the school committee?
Yeah,
What
because
about the
they're,
finance committee?
so I think.
That's what I'm kind of thinking about,
Right.
honestly, no offense.
No.
No, I'm shaking my head no.
Yeah,
You're shaking your head.
Finance
It's
committee
not
would
that
be
I
involved
won't
in every.
put in my effort, but I think it's not in part of our purview.
I agree.
And I think you also have the mechanism where if you saw something, you would bring it to a town administrator or a select board and be like, hey, you guys need to
Right.
We're
look
not
at
shy.
Right.
We don't have to be part of the process.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wonder one more thing, if we should even, if we're gonna do this, I wonder if we should even put in the makeup of the committee that we had last time, just as a reference point, because I know at school committee, there was banting around over a couple of different meetings as to who, what, how, voting, whatever, just because, let's say nobody's here. I'm not sure, you know, whoever's gonna be here, but then at least you'd have a basis to go by. So how did that go? So at least you'd have a basis to say, well, why did they want this committee member, or why were there only 4 voting members? Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel in the case of if we're all brand new, or if most of the people are brand new. I'm not saying you have to do it,
Yeah,
just
no,
give
no.
them an example if we're trying to redo it.
No, I hear you. And we can spell out as much as we want, right? So we can build another section that says, and the regional agreement shall consist of the following. We can do that. What I did like about this go around, I thought it worked well, was we had multiple dialogue on the composition of this committee, and we reached consensus. And so to me, that's always more powerful than anything in an agreement, because it takes historical, where are we in time, right? Because 3 years from now, or 6 years from now, or 9 years from now, it might be like, what the heck? You know, we got 4 voting members. What? No, we need 8. So I hear you, but like to me, I think we can decide. We can either codify it, or it just forces us to do what we did this time, which is we should have a conversation. Because I think if the school committee just says this is how it's going to be, like, you know, I'm long gone. I'm retired. Like, good luck. But we all know how that conversation's going to go. Like, it's just not the same. So I don't know. Frank, you look like you're itching to say something. No.
I'm just thinking, this is 23, 3 years would be 26. See, we started in 22.
Right.
So all of these things
Right.
have an impact. I mean, I don't have a problem with 25, but
So what
I think it's ironic that we're already into that year.
But
I know, right? Could finish that. All right. So let's bring it. Let's take it in pieces. So can we come to a consensus on the number of years review? Does 3 sound reasonable? Do you want it to be 5?
I think 3, because it gives you institutional history. Terms are up after every 3 years. So if you waited more than 3 years, you'd have a whole new group of individuals with no institutional history.
In theory, you could have a whole new group in 3 years. I think it's unlikely given the histories of all towns.
Right.
And how quickly we turn these boards over, but.
Right. But
I'm not sure
but you want to do this annually?
But I think even, let's just say, just in 3 years from now, neither one of us are here, there's going to be a selectman or select board member on our, respective committees that are going to know something about what is going on. And then, Chris is still here, or Jeff and John are still here. I would like to see 3, but in reality, one of the questions I was thinking of over the weekend, and just indulge me for a minute, I'm going a little off topic. We agree on a regional agreement. It goes to the school committee. Then it goes to the select board and selectmen of Whitman then it goes to the town meetings, then it goes to DESI.
Desi was somewhere in there, but yes.
I'm
But
sorry.
yes.
First it'll go to Desi.
Oh, it
But
goes to DESI before? Okay, so I
But
have.
you still have the groups, right? But you still have the groups, right? Yes, a lot of groups.
It still does have all those groups.
Yeah, 3 years from now, it's not going to be 2026, with all the time that we need to get this done. Honestly, I don't see it, even if we finish the whole thing tonight, the earliest it would go to town meeting would be 24, if it was on some kind of fast track. I would love to see it, but I don't see it. I don't see this going to town meeting until 25,
So-
in May. You're not
That
going to want
makes
to.
sense though, because then do you codify like?
So, yeah, so I think, so the question becomes though, so let's say it is gonna be, it's gonna be a process, right? So the way the theoretical language works is it's 3 years from the time it's fully approved.
Correct.
So which we all agree is probably the, at least a year and a half or whatever, you know, we're talking,
Yeah.
right? It's gonna be a ways down the road. But I guess the point is, in every step of that process, we're gonna be looking at it. Right? So Desi's gonna kick it back, we're gonna have to look at it. It's gonna go to school committee, we're gonna have to look at it. It's gonna have to go to, we're gonna look at it. So I don't think if the spirit of this is to make sure we're looking at it, we're looking at it.
Yes.
Once it's done and approved, at that point at town meetings, right, who knows, maybe something get changed on the floor and have to go, but it's done. It's done, we've looked at it, so now it's a question of, are we comfortable from that point, that's not today, but from that point going 3 years, because that's what maybe I
Correct.
made a blank, but that's what that's what we're trying to articulate here, is it's 3 years from the time it's approved. Which is why when I started to do this, I put in like 20, and I'm like, no. It's gotta be based upon anniversaries, because we don't know. So on the 3rd year, on the 3rd September, so on and so forth. I think it kind of gets us to where we're talking about. And it kind of flows from there. Because if we want to, or we could say we're gonna do it, you know, every 3 years, but after the first time, it's gonna be the first year. But we're gonna run into the same problem anytime. Anytime we open this up, it's gonna take a year to approve. So,
I mean, it really could be. We're looking at, I really believe, 2028, maybe 2027, the first time that it gets reviewed with what we're talking about now.
Fair point.
but are we okay with that?
I could support every 3 years, particularly if it's gonna be, you know, either select board, selectmen, or school committee has an issue, then it comes up.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I would think it would be a good idea. Justin will be in his 4th term.
That's
So
worth it. 12 years
this will
in.
be perfect.
So consensus, is this language close? Close
Yeah.
enough that,
3 years will work because it'll be cyclical and the year count starts when you sign the
when
agreement.
we sign it, correct?
So, good plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna I'm gonna move this language up when we're
Maybe the
done.
language should be 3 years from the
Ratification.
date of the agreement, from the ratification of the agreement.
I put fully approved, but let's put,
Either one.
ratification. Fully ratified. There's no, or ratified at town, so what is the final step, town meeting?
Yes.
So it goes to DESI before the selectmen?
I believe
To
so.
make sure it's all,
Make sure it's all
they have
set.
to do the legal laws and regulations piece, and then they say, okay, then it goes from there.
They're trying to avoid us wasting the time, right? Because you're like, oh, I love that, and then, like, no, you can't do
But it goes to the school committee before DESI.
It goes to, it would be at this committee's level. I think all of the committees would have, say, hey, here's where we're at. We're now going to go to DESI. And then if DESI comes back with changes, I think members of this committee would tell their.
We gotta come back.
That's
Move forward.
Presumably, when it goes to DESI, it's a school committee approved document.
it. Correct.
So that, and then what kicks in is the review by selectmen, or select board, and then by town. So perhaps on the 3rd September following ratification.
Exactly. Yep, that's what's in here.
Cool.
Okay, good. So we'll set that language aside. Again, I don't think you need to, if you want to share updates at your respective boards, go for it. But again, the intent is to kind of get similar sections here in a document, then you can do it all at once. So you don't have to.
Ideally, we'll be looking at it every 3 years and we'll have a problem.
Ideally.
Yes.
About it.
Okay, so we went through that, and so can we go back up to?
Can I pause for a minute?
Yeah.
So it goes from here.
No, you got that.
to DESI, and then it comes back to us.
That's right.
To school committee, to selectmen, to town votes it, then it goes to the commissioner to sign.
Okay, so
Do it.
So the commissioner is the final after town meeting, but everything should have been worked out to that point.
perfect.
So how does, what if there's a change in town meeting floor? Does we have to go through that whole thing again?
Yep,
Kind of like we're here.
Yes.
yeah, start all over again, which is again why I think we can put the time and effort to really go deeper and understand why are we doing this and make sure with the language, and if you take this back to your boards, whatever that is, 2-3 weeks from now, and they're like, hell no, absolutely not, you gotta figure that stuff out now, and then hopefully get it done before the sports change. We gotta figure that stuff out now so that we avoid that, you know. Well, we're all sitting here patting ourselves on the back, it's great, and then somebody says no, so, yeah.
So would that be 3 years after the commissioner signs it?
2027.
That would be a fully ratified after,
So the last is the commissioner sign, even better, thank you,
approval by the commissioners last time.
is signed by.
That was 20
If approved at town meeting, must be sent to DESI along with certified votes.
3 years
for
of the
the number
DESI.
of towns. So,
I will have you all over for a beverage of your choice when that happens.
Might even take the final approval, right? Or something.
yeah.
All right, so let's go back now that we have Jeff. So Jeff, we kind of went through the 77, or is it 7,000 section?
Yep.
That was one takeaway that John had, we went through that in the drive, and then you were gonna look a little bit about emergency repairs, and we'll bring that back to a discussion of capital costs of emergency repairs.
So if I can get into my drive. You should have some emergency repairs as PDFs in your drive, listed under emergency repairs. And we went back, tried to go back 5 years, we couldn't have 5 years, so I have the past couple of years.
You're looking for it, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm looking for it.
Yeah, it's in the RAC emergency requests folder.
What document, Chris? What's it titled?
There's a few here. They're not titled, they just,
Is it like SKM something?
SKMC 3682. It's a,
It's mostly the SKM. You see an SKM that looks like a letter, and you hit on it, that's what it is.
Yep.
You gotta use the title.
Thanks. So if you look at those, I know one of them is the biggest one we've ever had, which was just recently, regarding the software breach and the doors and locks. Another one looked like the Whitman bill for $54,000 for mold was one of those. But they average, it looks like there wasn't anything crazy. 8,500 for something. 11,800 for an elevator, a blown valve.
RTU Unit 1 chill coil.
Sorry, folks. I'm sorry. It's okay. I got it, yep.
iPad to
iPad. $20,000 for roofs for Duval. But it looks like something, everything that, except I was just going to say, everything looks like under $25,000 except for this one here is 32.5 chilled water cooler on rooftop number 1. Crane service was $2,200. Renting temporary Cs was $22,000, and electrical work was $2,500. So that looked like a $50,000 project. But I think that's the ballpark of what we're looking at. I know we talked about like 100,000, 200,000. I don't think we've ever eclipsed that piece of it. It seems like, again, if George and I are thinking about it, nothing has gone in front of the towns. It's been at 5 to 15, sometimes 20, and Frank's been here longer than we have. 25,000, maybe a $30,000 piece once in a while, but not anything to that $100,000 mark, minus the mold thing. And I think 2014, the mold extraction was somewhere in the ballpark of $35,000 to $40,000.
But even those, with the exception of what happens in the high school,
Yeah.
still become town expenditures.
Right.
whether the school initially pays for it, it's then allocated back to the owning town. It's just a question of when it's paid.
Right, so I think we were talking about last week what might be, and I agree with the $5,000 threshold to send capital emergency repairs to the town back in '91 is long gone. I think we need to move that forward a little bit, but I think trying to figure out what a good ballpark would be for an emergency capital request would be coming up with a dollar amount. You know, I think somebody asked the question, what would you like it? I said, so it's 10, because it takes the burden off of my school budget. You know what I mean? And the thought process is potentially using excess and deficiency to cover some of those costs as well, depending on what the final number for E&D is certified in October. So we have a variance of what we could potentially do in this regional agreement without adding necessarily money to the district. And we don't have a line item necessarily for maintenance repairs. It's small for those under 5,000, without necessarily adding it to the district budget, utilizing potentially some E&D funds for something that might cost to the extent of $20,000 or $30,000. Again, depending, and I think we talked a little bit about based upon a percentage of what we have in E&D. So for ballpark, we have a 1.7 million in E&D right now. If the school committee decides to use X amount, $600,000, $700,000 of one-time expenses in FY24, our certified E&D or our E&D would be at $1 million. If the percentage of going into FY24 was 10%, a certain amount could be used for capital costs, and I think it's another conversation with the school committee. Say the school committee authorizes up to $50,000 or $70,000 of E&D for capital projects or emergencies, that would be at my discretion or my facility's discretion to just do that without going out to the towns for those capital costs. But what if it exceeds that? So again, I'm not looking at, based upon the history, there's nothing that's $250,000. There's nothing that's really $100,000 outside of this year, and God hope that we never have that type of this year. But there have been $50,000 expenses. An RTU unit goes, a boiler goes, something like that. 5-10 years from now, we might have to look at that cost and how we pay for that. So,
just to add a little context, right? I think we talked about last time, there's kind of the big difference between an emergency repair that results in the acquisition of a capital item and then an emergency repair to repair something. Right. So for example, like a boiler breaks, we need a part, okay. A boiler breaks, we need a new boiler.
right.
That's right. So this is what we got to kind of carve out. There's different there's different pieces there because using E&D like okay, the part broke, that's great. Using E&D to say, well, that's long-term capital and we need
it's an emergency
that's
request
not
because we need it. Right.
It's more of a temporary. But go ahead, Justin.
And I was just going to say, we want to be careful if we really define what this is, because what we don't want to see is the district, sitting on not making $5,000 worth of HVAC repairs, stressing the rest of the system, and ending up needing a significant larger. Yeah. So if we set some dollar threshold that may incentivize you to not make the repairs, we don't want to start going down that road.
I think we have to also keep in mind is if we chunk this, it is what's the threshold of emergency repairs, and then the second one is what is a long-term capital expense, and then who would pay for that? Because I would contend that if you were to go, if $5,000 is the threshold of 91 for emergency repairs, what you've seen today in those 5 examples is higher than that. So then I think we have to say, okay, what's for emergency repairs? And then we have to say, from there, what is the capital and how is that going to be used? Because those are 2 different things. We call them emergency capital, but I mean, when the RTU unit goes a week before school starts and it's 95 degrees out, you have an issue. So just like when the boiler goes and we did something over at Hanson Middle for a split mini fan, and then we did something with the boiler because the letter went to Lisa, that's an emergency. So we have to do that. I think we have to flesh those both out.
So what is the
Can I just,
funding mechanism?
can I just ask a question, because Lisa and Frank, you guys get that. So what happens? You know, I write you a letter and say, oh, you know, we have this, what's that process there? And then just honestly, what's the burden on the on the town?
Well,
You know?
typically, when we have when the school district notifies us that there is a, lack of a better description, capital expenditure necessary for an urgent repair, what I do is I go to the Board of Selectmen and say, this is what's happened, this is what needs to be done, I would like your commitment to place this on an article in May so that the school can be reimbursed for this expenditure. And then typically in May, and the special or that part of the warrant that's dedicated to current year fiscal expenditures, the vote's taken and the money is reimbursed to the school. There's no standing appropriation that we have that we could simply cut a check from. It all involves approval at town meeting. And there's a really hairline risk that we could go to town meeting and say, look, Jeff, we'll cover the 50 grand, make the repairs. We go to town meeting and they say no. Then Whitman and Hanson start to have a little anxiety. So I think we have to be sure we're identifying clearly what type of expenditure it is and where it's coming from.
Lisa, you have anything different or additional?
Very similar to the process that Frank had outlined, as far as we go before the board, talk to the town accountant, and then, if we're reimbursing, it has to go to town meeting.
And is that, if I could follow up, is that the same as something happens at PD and Chief Hanlon says, hey, look, you know, a pipe burst and it's $25,000 because there's something everywhere. What's that process? Who fixes that?
So hold on, I think keep it apples to apples though,
Okay,
right?
sorry.
So let's say you go to the, right, let's use the same example. The RTU, the air conditioner fails at Whitman Police. What is that process?
We tell them to fix it, cover it with his expense, and we'll look to reimburse him.
But if he says, I can't fix it and I need to buy a new one, what is that process?
It depends on how much the new one is. There's a point at which we don't have the money to do it. Then we'd actually have to hold a special town meeting. I have had instances where I've told a manager to go ahead and spend X number of dollars to make the necessary immediate repairs with the expectation that come May 1st, we will be able to transfer money from another budget that will cover it. But I've also had instances where I've actually had to go to the Division of Accounts and get permission to deficit spend. And when that happens, we're authorized to spend, and if we don't make it up in our regular budget process, then it goes on the recap sheet.
And is that different whether you re-estimate repairs or different?
So that might be what I would consider our capital cost maybe for something like that. But if you have a extensive repair and that the police station can't be worked in and it's not safe, because that's what we're using it.
Let's say if the police station had homes.
So, but what if, one of the departments, a library, police station, something that the public utilizes daily wasn't safe, and you need it, and it was necessary to open, what would happen? And say it's not a $300,000, it's a $25,000 to $30,000 repair, and it's not in Chief Hamlin's budget. What happens?
Again, I would tell them, with the approval of the board,
Fix it.
spend it, fix it, and we'll deal with it in May.
Okay. So kind of similar process.
Similar to what we've done with the schools.
Okay.
And
Sorry,
Chris, if
yeah,
I may,
yeah, of course.
and please do not take this the wrong way. okay? But I think you're putting Lisa and Frank at a little bit of a disadvantage, because you said if something were needed to be fixed at one of the schools, you go to the town for reimbursement. Then you say to Frank, what if a pipe burst in the police station? The police station has to be open, it has to run. They have no choice but to get that fixed. But your first example of how it works for the district was unfair compared to an emergency district, how it would work for the town. Because
Yeah.
Go ahead, Frank.
We've had that happen the other way too, where the school has come to us and said, we need money now to do this. We've looked at it and said, no, we don't feel it's an emergency and we're gonna
Well, we're gonna get into that later then.
deal with it. We're gonna deal with it in May. And it was a situation with, I think it was roads at the DeVal school or something. It was something at the
Frank, it was a
DeVal
parking lot.
parking lot, thank you. And sorry guys, you're gonna have to hit the potholes.
But this is the great thing about this committee, is that we're talking this stuff out. That's only my opinion.
So it's a similar.
Yeah, I think it was an unfair question. But what I kind of wanted to talk to John about, because, you know, we can keep dancing around the table all night long, well, until 20 past 6. You guys want a number in the agreement. We want a number in the agreement. We just don't know what that number is. So my thinking is we need to start somewhere. And I'm not blaming anyone. I was part of that. We messed up 6 or 7 years ago when we kept it at 5,000. Why? Because it was easy to keep it at 5,000. John, I don't know if you can do this, but if the people before us 30 years ago took it seriously, that even though they said in the agreement it needs to be looked at every 5 years, they didn't. And I'm hoping you can do this. But in 1992, 5,000 was this. In 2023, what is that? What is the 5,000 from 1992? What is that number today because of inflation? We don't have to agree on it. It just gives us a starting number.
I don't think the school's gonna want to hear that number.
But I'm not, Jim, and I appreciate the point, but.
No,
Jim,
because it has to go up.
No, but I don't know if it's all about the number, because I think, going back to your point, when we look at the 92 agreement, there is vague language around what is an emergency repair or extraordinary. So so before we get to the number, we gotta figure out what are we talking about.
But can I just ask something? Don't towns also have a reserve fund that we don't have in our funding system for things like this?
You have E&D.
We have excess
You can
efficiency,
spend that.
but
You
you
can
also have
access
free
that.
cash, which we don't. So I guess I'm just wondering what type of mechanisms are out there if we're gonna take now the inflation rate from 1991 and try to apply it to that. Because the towns are, the schools are part of and owned by, the buildings are owned by the town too.
Our reserve fund is 35,000,
Yeah, that's,
Right.
so it's not hundreds of thousands.
Right.
it's
Yeah,
small,
Lisa, go ahead.
small
Here's a
stuff.
question too on these emergency repairs. Would it be considered whether the repair would be covered by insurance? So the example of the
Right.
pipe, the water pipe at a police station would be covered by insurance. So with the emergency repairs, are we talking about something that would not be covered by insurance?
I think, and that's the hard part, again, if we go back to the language that we're living under today, capital costs shall include all expenses in the nature of capital outlays such as the cost of acquiring land, cost of constructing, reconstructing, and adding to buildings, and the cost of remodeling or making extraordinary repairs to school buildings. So if any of you can explicitly tell me what making extraordinary repairs to school buildings is defined, then we don't have to have a conversation. But if you can't, then we have to have a conversation around what does that mean?
Can we start by defining what emergency is?
Right, and I think that's where this conversation is
Say,
kind
Yeah.
of
about safety?
Now, George came up with the phrase last week.
We have,
It's 60 minutes last week.
Prevents,
That's
safety
exactly what
prevents.
Safe operation of the school building.
The school can't open.
so, you're right, so in that first paragraph, emergency repairs,
I think it should be that simple, Chris.
emergency repairs potentially defined as something that impacts student and or staff safety or day-to-day operations. Like that's kind of what we had last time. But then the question is, we're still not talking about, is that an emergency repair covered by insurance? Is that an emergency repair that we just need to fix something? Or is that an emergency repair that's going to require the acquisition of a completely new capital cost? That, right, like that's what we got to get to, because I think in any of those, the answer is going to be different. If it's insurance, it's zero. If it's a new capital item, to me, I'm only speaking for myself, like, again, I don't think the school should be on the hook for saying, like, the boiler blew and we just bought a new boiler. That doesn't feel right, right? Like, that's why we go to town meeting for big capital expenses. So, like, to me, it's not as simple as, like, it's just going to be a number. We got to start to delve into, is it emergency? Is it a repair? Is it insurance? Is it capital?
So do you want to define the emergency before you define how much money?
I think we have to, because otherwise I think that's where we get.
Okay, but Chris, and I don't want to put words in Chris's mouth, but he just said something about safety. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Chris, but.
No, I think it sounds like what you guys were saying last week about safety, that it's, if emergency spending should be predicated on whether or not it's safe.
Right, so emergency repairs potentially defined as something that impacts student and or staff safety or day-to-day operations, right? So it's, we gotta close the schools, we're putting students at risk, we're putting staff at risk, like I think it's all common sense stuff. Same thing at a police station, like it's the same thing. We don't wanna put people in an environment where they can't do their jobs that they need to do. So we kinda have the emergency, I think, right? We kinda have that. But now it starts to go into like, and this is where we're getting stuck a little bit, but what are the what if, like, do we have to now go into what ifs? Because not all emergencies are created equal, right?
Well, right, but then that's what we talked about last week, the E&D money, where if you have $2 million in that fund, and we were gonna go with a percentage, not a dollar amount, and if you did need a new boiler at $50,000, if, do easy math, if it was, 10% of what you have in E&D, then you pay for it. If you don't, then we have to fix that. The towns would have to come up.
So can I just throw in, because we're talking, the Whitman Middle School building project, this would come up. So if the boiler blew in Hanson, and I'm using E&D, Whitman's paying for the new boiler in Hanson?
No.
And vice, see, that's.
But even
See, that was my point,
Yeah,
that
that's the
anything
issue.
that occurs at the high school is clearly a regional expense.
Yes.
Yeah,
When things occur in the town-owned buildings, we have acknowledged in the past, and I think continue to acknowledge, that they are our responsibility. And the good news is, we can answer your question about what 5,000 is worth. At 117% inflation since then, it's $10,895. So I think we've just identified what the capital threshold should be.
But I don't even think, again, Jeff, you guys tell me if I'm speaking wrong, but I don't think you're saying the capital limit should be 10. I think we're getting trapped into the emergency repair stuff. I don't think you're saying like, we're gonna send everything that's, $11,000 and up as a capital expense to the town. Like what, at this day and age, like what do you buy? What is it? What HVC or boiler do you buy for 11 grand? Like those are gonna be big ticket expenses. We're stuck on this emergency.
Right, but I think that amount was always for the emergency aspect of it.
It was.
Right, so like,
Emergencies were cheaper then.
right, but I mean, but that amount went to that, and then we'd have to decide, does that repair get us to limp along on the RTU unit, and then we have to go to capital the next year to replace it? Or does that frame now our long-term capital plan?
I think the piece of whether it's capital or repair goes to the accounting rules. Just, helping something, a Band-Aid on a boiler, that's an expense. It's an emergency because it's unplanned. But then if it's capital, like replacing the whole boiler, that's definitely a capital item, regardless of.
The other difference in approach is if you think back when this first agreement was done, it was not unusual to have 5 town meetings a year. If you called me in 1994 and said, we need $11,000 to repair something at the Conley, we would have held a town meeting for it. We would have taken 14 days, notified the inhabitants or warned the inhabitants at a meeting, and we would have voted, unless we didn't get a quorum. We don't do that anymore because it's not practical. So the practicality also has to apply to how we spend money.
Yeah, and I still think there's two issues. I still think there's the emergency issue and what that threshold is, and then I would go to what you're saying. If I'm not necessarily saying I agree with it, but the concept of the percentage of E&D, should you want some type of capital? You know, but I think there are two pieces. I think the first thing we have to figure out is if we use the 117% whatever inflation, then it sounds like you're going to go about $12,000 for an emergency capital repair that might go to towns. And then we'd have to decide how do you then fund capital items from there, which is the process we have now, but we've never really decided on what that amount is because it's usually what towns can afford.
I'm just reading the scribbling in the original agreement that talks about the 5,000.
15,000 and 10%.
No, I get, right, but I think, so Jim, I hear what you're saying. I can't come to a place where I can logically support ever using E&D for a capital expense for the school.
Yeah, and so let's try to what Jeff said a few minutes ago. Duval roof leaks pretty regularly, and if every time that happens, it's below the threshold and comes out of E&D, how's that going to go over in Hanson where it's effectively 40%?
Oh, no, it's going to go fine because Duval is strictly in Whitman and we don't pay.
But E&D is.
So, and then you get into the situation where I guess you would have to look at that money because it's not as easy as a 60-40 split anymore. That would be in there. So now, you know, it doesn't really matter what we do. We're opening up a can of worms on everything because when I look around this room, and it's not our fault, we were stuck with this 32-year-old agreement because the people before us didn't do what they volunteered to do, what they were voted in to do, and what they had jobs to do. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're responsible now, so we have to figure that out.
And maybe, but the world was also a lot different 32 years ago, right? When they were having, right? So they may have done something that worked 32 years ago, and it clearly does not work now. I mean, literally, it was before the internet. I mean, like things have changed in the last 32 years. Right? Like technology, there was no Wi-Fi. There was
What's this internet anyway?
Right, well, a while back, right?
Okay, so if I do my math correctly, 10 years after this was signed, 2001, 2002, whatever you want to say, the only one that would be sitting at this table then and now would be Frank, who is a town administrator and has nothing to do except making sure back in '92 it was approved.
Right.
So the people that were actually in charge of this agreement, which I would put it on the school committee and the board of selectmen, somewhere along the line, nobody ever said, let's look at this.
Right.
Until 2017, my first year on the board, you know, a new method was coming in and we all knew it, but it literally took, what, 24 years to have it looked at. So
And to your point, but here we are.
Right, so this is what we're here to do, is to prevent that again.
Chris, one other note,
Yeah.
if I may. You said you had a concern about ever using E&D for capital. E&D is the region's free cash.
Right.
Our towns fund most of our capital through free cash.
E&D is the region's capital. Yes, correct.
So I respect the idea that you want to preserve E&D,
Yeah, and so, yeah.
but
let me
you
share-
also have to recognize that
Yeah.
we do the same thing, and we know that our free cash is going to fund the majority of whatever capital we're doing, unless we're brassy enough to go to town meeting and say, I want a capital override, so we always have capital money.
No, I understand. And I think the part that we're concerned isn't so much into tapping E&D, it's we're not creating a normal operating flow, right? You know the drill, right? You're using one-time money for what is clearly an operating cost. Like, we're gonna have to buy an air conditioning unit. You got the accounting rules, it's what, 10 years, PCs are, like, these are things that we know, whether it's town or business or schools, we're not intended to get 50 years out of, this.
And we face those same issues in the towns I air conditioned the town hall in 2012. That unit's now 10 years old. We've already had to do major replacement parts for the big chiller. And I think in the next 3 years, we're going to be replacing a series of units that are going to be needed. They need them for our operation, but they're going to be capital expenditures.
Which, again, I understand, but there is a different way to manage that. I think for E&D for the schools, we gotta come to the place where it's there, and it should be an amount that is for emergency situations, right? But there isn't, I don't know if there's really a plan to say we're gonna spend it in emergency situations and we're gonna build it back. It's just not different. But yeah, Lisa.
So when you're looking at the language of the 1992 agreement, this is just my take and interpretation on it. So it says making extraordinary repairs to school buildings, including without limitation the cost of the original equipment and furnishings. And then just crossing over all that, but then it'll say, and other costs incidental to placing school buildings in additions and related premises in operating condition.
Right.
So reasonably, if we think back 10 years, when was the last time something blew and they couldn't get it running? And I know I've worked with Ernie for a long time, and he would say, oh, this broke down, but we've called in somebody and they can replace this spring, they can replace this part and get it running, and then until we can go to town meeting and replace it. Or, he found a way to get whatever it was that broke running. So I guess maybe we could look at that question. Is it an extraordinary repair that will get the related premises in operating condition? That way, so that's an emergency, say a boiler breaks. So somebody comes in and repairs it and gets it back in operating condition.
Yep.
So the boiler is not dead and buried, it's repairable. So I guess we're looking at this is to say, but then it becomes capital if it has died completely and there's no possible way they can get this up and running.
That's kind of where I'm distinguishing.
Yeah, because the language just says to get it up in operating condition. So it doesn't say replace it for a brand new unit.
Correct.
Yeah, Whitman Middle School, we had the 2 boilers in one system, and one was already down because we couldn't cannibalize it anymore to make it run, and then the other one went in the middle of the winter, and that was an emergency. That was an emergency replacement.
And I said,
that was the only time I remember.
Yeah.
Right, that was the only time I remember. That was a complete and utter.
Yep.
The other one already broke, so that was the first time that we
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah, and because we want to be smart about it too. Like, we're all, I think, thinking outside the box. We don't want to create these perverse incentives where it's like, well, I'd rather spend $200,000 fixing it because I know I can get money this way, even though the new unit will only cost $175, right? Right, so we have to think through all of this. But, this is good conversation. I hope the folks that this 92 had the same conversation, whether they did or didn't. It's a moot point at this point. We need to do it. So, I don't know, we're probably at a point where somebody said 620, we're getting close. I think maybe we should really think about if we could all maybe come with some ideas on how do we deal with this? Is it just right? And we'll just share ideas and talk through it. And maybe that's where we pick up next meeting and try and get this done. Because if we can get through the capital items and the extraordinary repair costs, then we have, only open items we have are leases, the statutory method, which is already amended, and then we get the only other item outside the agreement is really ours and where they fit in. So, I'm hoping we can get to a place within either the next meeting or thereafter, where we can kind of have something to take back to our boards and say, here's kind of what we talked about, here's what we're thinking, and here's where we need you to weigh in. You know, what do you think about a 2/3 vote here? What do you think about the transportation stuff? What do you think about what we've defined as capital costs? So I think we're making good progress, but at the same time, we don't have to belabor it too much, so.
So it's every Monday.
Every Monday. Well, and so I want to clarify. Every Monday, but we probably should, just in the interest of, again, federal holidays, we'll meet next Monday and the Monday after. And then I think the third Monday is the 20th, which is President's Day, yes? So we should not be, so in a perfect world, if we can hammer some of this out in the next two,
Get into a bullet.
then we'll probably need more than a 1 week break, but that would be a good time to kind of take a little bit of a break and say, here you go, take 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever you need, and then we'll come back with input. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yes.
I think that timing is great.
Which
Frank, what are you wearing?
I know what that means. Good seeing you.
Say this
Yeah.
way.
How many more meetings?
That might be a section where we don't come up, where we don't have a clear cut answer, that we might have to put in
Hang on one second.
an analysis on maybe a case-by-case basis, depending on what it is, because you don't have exact, we never have a crystal ball that's going to tell us what the future brings. So trying to put exact language to just kind of pinpoint what exactly to do for this particular subject may not be possible.
No.
And we might need language that allows for discretion in
Reasonable effort to repair.
reasonable efforts, and so we might need language for that
Absolutely.
section that allows for that on a case-by-case basis.
So I think so I'm not saying we need language that's specific that covers everything, but I think we need language, going back to the point someone made in the school committee, that we all understand.
Right,
So,
yeah.
right, he can't be saying, well, I'm going to interpret it as discretion, but like, it's got to be, yeah, you know what? At this point, we're all going to come into a room and whatever, flip a coin and arm wrestle and figure it out, sure.
And I don't want to be-
But we're all under the same opinion.
Common understanding.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't want to be the extender, but like, if we go back to 2014, when there was the mold debate and it first happened in Woodland, that was a combination of,
I take care of you.
yeah, we said, we got to call Frank. So I think it was me, you, and Ernie at the time, and then I think Bruce came down afterwards, but it was like, okay, what have we done? What does it look like? What are the costs? And it was more like a group effort to say, okay, do we have to cancel school? If we're not canceling school, we got to shut this area off, we got to get it cleaned, and then we got to go back. So I mean, there has been that always that takes place with something that falls under emergency.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they are town-owned buildings. So
Right.
like, that's the other side of this. I don't think it's like, if it's my building, I kind of want to know what you're doing to it,
Right.
right? Like,
Well, of course, it's also loony to have a building with 3 roofs on it,
Yes, I do
or 3
agree.
layers of roof on it.
I do agree.
all right, good meeting. We'll see you all next Monday. Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? All right. Take care.